This is your first multi-voice time writing at 140 words per minute. Your proper names are Eugene, Mr. McDonald, Mr. Smith, Mr. Paul, Joseph, Dan Smith, El Paso, Joseph Paul, and Pauls. I am Mr. McDonald.
The witness.
The court. Mr. McDonald.
The witness.
The court. It will begin with colloquy by the court. Ready?
Eugene,
May it please the court, Your Honor?
you may proceed, Mr. McDonald, please.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Well, just a minute. Mr. Smith, would you please raise your right hand and be sworn? Okay.
Good morning, Your Honor. May I make a brief opening statement, Your Honor? We're here representing Mr. Paul alleging ineffective assistance of counsel. I want the court to understand that this is not an attempt to elicit information to file a suit. We have no desire to file a suit against Mr. Smith. We're here merely to preserve our client's rights, and I'd like to begin by questioning Mr. Smith, Your Honor.
Okay, now before you do, the court has found the original motion and it shows the date that it was filed, so I have located it now. All right, please proceed.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Judge, before we begin, there's information I think they're going to be requesting for testimony between the client and myself, and that's privileged information. Now, if the court so orders me to testify, I will so, but that's a privilege that belongs to my client, not to me. And if they're eliciting information concerning information between both of us, that is covered by attorney-client privilege. And unless it's waived, I will not testify, cannot testify.
Now, Your Honor, on behalf of Mr. Paul, we are waiving the attorney-client privilege that exists between Mr. Smith.
There was a motion to substitute counsel, and based on that motion, you all were appointed to take Mr. Smith's place. And so now, Joseph, you and your mother and dad have heard what has been said, that if he's asked some questions the questions he's asked may have a bearing on attorney and client, and that's a privileged communication. And if you all, especially the juvenile, are willing to waive that, then he can answer the questions. And I preface that by saying that you already had asked that he be removed and substitute counsel, so I only make that known because I assume that you will waive, but that is your decision to make. Do you understand what I've told you? Do you waive the privilege of attorney and client?
I waive the attorney-client privilege, sir.
All right. Mr. McDonald, the record shows that that privilege between attorney and client and confidential communications has been waived.
Thank you, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Would you please state your full name for the record, sir?
Dan Smith.
And Mr. Smith, how long have you been practicing law here in El Paso?
Since November of 1980.
Mr. Smith, when you were hired to represent Joseph Paul?
A little bit before October the 1st of 2002 on this case.
On this case? All right, sir. And unless I tell you otherwise, all my questions reference this case.
Okay, sir.
Thank you, sir. Would you discuss for the court your investigation of Mr. Paul's case after being hired?
Well, I spent probably half hour, 45 minutes talking to Mr. Paul and his mother when they first entered into my office. I asked them to give me the information concerning the assertions in the pleadings, and basically that there was an allegation that there was 2 or 3 counts of indecency with a child. We determined that the complaining witness was a neighbor, that this was a child who grew up in the neighborhood that Joseph and his sister and his parents were in, and I was able to confer with the mother and the young man to determine where this was coming from, why it was coming from them, and what they thought. We determined that the relationship between the Pauls and the complaining witness's parents prior to this incident had been a good one. They had been close. So they had basically been good neighbors. And that as a result of this particular assertion that the testimony against my client would be sufficient, that the relationship between the parents, so both parties were strained, and that they were no longer speaking. They were no longer close.
This is your second multi-voiced. I'm writing at 140 words per minute. Your proper names are People versus Ortiz, Officer Levson, Officer Kurt Levson, Orange County Sheriff's Department, Music, Whittier Police Department, Whittier, Peoples 6, Peoples 7, Peoples 8, Peoples 9, P8, P9. I am Ms. Torres.
The witness?
The court. Ms. Torres.
The witness?
The court. It will begin with colloquy by the court. Ready?
All right. This is People versus Ortiz. Defendant is present with counsel. People are represented. All jurors and alternates are present.
Could we approach, Your Honor? I forgot to ask you on an issue before we start.
About this witness?
Yes, it will be concerning this witness.
Off the record? On the record?
Off.
Okay.
Your Honor, I did attempt to contact the officer that retrieved this phone book from the defendant. He did prepare the booking slip. He's not available today. He's at home with taking care of his children. I spoke to him telephonically and advised him, and he said he is not available until tomorrow. But that is the only foundation that I have that's not on the booking sheet, and I haven't been able to clarify. But I was going to check property and county to make sure it was in there, and I haven't been able to do that.
Well, yeah, you better not present it until you can lay that foundation.
Okay, thank you. Officer Levson.
Go ahead and be seated. You are reminded you were previously sworn. Please have a seat and restate your name for the record.
Officer Kurt Levson.
Okay, Officer Levson, before we broke for lunch, you started to explain what your experience or training and experience as an expert relating to gangs. Can you continue with that?
Can I be refreshed where I left off so I don't have to borrow?
Go ahead and start from the beginning.
Okay. I was hired by the Orange County Sheriff's Department in 1990. I was assigned to the Music Jail facility. There I worked as a classification and housing deputy. As a classification deputy, I interviewed probably literally thousands of inmates, many of which were gang members. The reason we interviewed them was mostly for their safety, because we wouldn't want to house gang members from rival gangs together, or if they had special concerns because they were in trouble with the gang or whatever it might be. In October of 1992, I was hired by the Whittier Police Department. The first 4.5 years, I worked in patrol as a patrol officer and as a field training officer. During that time, I interviewed probably hundreds of gang members, many of which resulted in arrests. And over the last, 5 years, I should say, just after working patrol, I was part of the Whittier gang unit. And during that time, I interviewed literally over, let's just say thousands of gang members. My daily duties were to review all gang-related reports, assist the detectives on gang cases. I checked all gang bookings and interviewed all in-custody gang members that I was able to interview in the course of my duties. I worked only 40 hours a week, so I couldn't get to all of them, but as many as I could. I checked in-custody gang members for new tattoos. If there were new tattoos, then I'd photograph those and document the new tattoos. I reviewed all the field interview cards. Field interview cards are cards which are filled out either for investigative purposes or for just consensual contacts made in the field by patrol officers in which individuals were stopped. In a situation where we have gang members that are field interviewed, I would review those to gather the gang information off those, who they associate with, where they were stopped, what kind of car they were driving, basically any information they'd be willing to give me or the officers that were doing the card.
Let me stop you right there. And with that, Your Honor, we're going to mark these two documents, which both contain what appear to be Whittier Police Field Interview cards. Those would be People 6 and People 7.
No, 8 and 9, counsel.
I'm sorry, that's what I meant. I was reading that.
All right, marked.
People's 8 and People's 9. And placing a P8 and a P9 on the lower right-hand corner of the documents. Showing you People's 8 for identification. Do you recognize those cards?
Yes, I do.
And are those the cards you were just describing? This is your first multi-voice time writing. At 120 words per minute, your proper names are Mr. Kern, Mr. Smith, Judge Kuhn, TDC, and John Smith. I am Mr. Roberts.
The witness?
The court. Mr. Roberts.
The witness?
The court. This will begin with a question by me, Mr. Roberts. Ready? Mr. Kern, just to move you along a little bit, because we have a couple of other witnesses. At which time did Mr. Smith inform you that probation was out the window?
The morning, I wouldn't have known it, but it was the morning of the 9th. He came in and I presented a thing to Judge Kuhn and he came in and he says, well, I've got bad news for you guys.
Wait a minute. The morning of the 9th of what?
Of February.
January.
February, when you came back for the shock probation?
We had the meeting in the jail, all 4 of us and Mr. Smith.
Okay, you had gone down to TDC at that point and were brought back?
No. We didn't get out of here until May.
Oh, all right. I forgot.
And we were...
Right. Okay.
I mean, so we didn't get out of here until May.
So this is the February 9th hearing?
This is the February 9th. And he basically said, well, guys, it's been turned down.
Is this shock probation or probation in general?
This was shock.
When had probation in general been turned down?
It had been discussed and I had prepared this drug interdiction plan and had proposed it to the court and had presented it. And the understanding and the comment that was made by Mr. Smith was, do a good job on it because there's a lot riding on this. So I presented the thing, and the judge sat in the audience and called some people back in that were experts on drug counseling. And I presented this thing, and the judge actually walked by me and said, "You did a real good job." So I felt positive about this thing. So about 2 weeks later, Mr. Smith comes into court, or the dining hall at the county on the 7th floor, and he says, "Well, it's, no probation, no shock. You're going to go to TDC." And I jokingly said, "That's great. When do we get out of here?" Because I felt so positive about what had been done in court with the presentation. And he said, "No, I'm serious. They have denied your shock probation. There was never a comment made to us about going to a hearing. I mean, now I understand that we should have been in a hearing. I mean, we didn't leave that cell. I mean, to go to any hearings across to the courthouse. The only time I left was when I went to make my presentation."
Now, Mr. Kern, with the level of preparation that you saw, did you feel comfortable going to trial with John Smith on that Friday?
No.
Did any of the defendants express any confidence in going to trial?
I don't think we could no, but we were in shock.
Okay.
We were just flat in shock. We had been told, don't worry. And here comes the bomb, you're going for 40 years with no preparation. That was the preparation. You're going to trial Monday morning for 40 years.
Now, prior to this, you had worked in what capacity prior to your arrest? Healthcare, and you've served your sentence. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
You're currently on parole?
Yes, sir.
And you have completed everything that's required for a nursing degree. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
But it cannot. Can I get some batteries?
Yes.
There's one left.
Okay, good.
Pause the recording. Don't let me forget. This is your second multi-voice time writing at 120 words per minute. Your proper names are Bernie Sims, Mr. Williams, Officer Diaz, Montevista, Ms. Mares or Ms. Mares, Ms. Garcia, John, Ms. Thomases, Tom and Jerry, Philip, and David. I am Mr. Williams.
The witness.
The court. Mr. Williams.
The witness.
The court.
It is going to begin with colloquy by me, Mr. Williams. Ready? Nothing further from this witness, Your Honor.
All right. You may step down, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Your Honor, would you like us to call our next witness?
Yes, we're going to take hopefully 1 or 2 more witnesses.
Your Honor, we're going to call the victim next.
Huh?
We're going to call the witness next, Bernie Sims. It may take a while on this one, Your Honor.
All right. Then call that witness and see how far we progress with that one. Mr. Williams, again, I'm going to ask you to speak a little louder into that microphone because I have some difficulty in hearing you.
Okay, Your Honor, may we let Officer Diaz go at this time? I have no further need for him if the defense doesn't have any objections.
Young man, you have already taken an oath, and I asked you some questions, and you said you understood the oath. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
All right. What did that mean when you took the oath? What did it mean?
I don't know.
Huh?
I don't know.
You told me that it meant that you were swearing to tell the truth. Is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Speak a little louder into that mic.
Yes, sir.
All right. Mr. Williams?
Your Honor, Officer Diaz would like to be released. I don't have any other use for him this afternoon. If counsel doesn't have any use for him,
Then in that case, since we're not going to have any other, yes, he can be, subject to recall that he can be available by phone or whatever for coming in tomorrow maybe. Speak into that microphone, Mr. Williams, loud and clear, if you will, please.
could you please state your name for us?
Did you understand that you were asked a question?
I forgot it.
I can't hear you.
I forgot it.
Speak into the mic.
I forgot it.
Is it Bernie Sims?
Uh-huh.
How old are you?
7
Okay, do you know your birthday?
October the 3rd.
Okay, and where do you go to school at?
Monte Vista.
Who's your teacher there?
Ms. Mares and Ms. Garcia.
Speak into that. Speak a little louder, young man.
Ms. Mares and Ms. Garcia.
Sit right up to that mic so we can hear you, okay?
Ms. Mares and Ms. Garcia.
And do you know the difference between a truth and a lie?
Uh-huh. Uh-uh.
If I told you that that shirt you had on was black, would that be telling the truth or telling a lie?
Lie.
And why is that?
Because my shirt isn't black.
What color is it?
Orange and white.
If I said your shirt was orange and white, would that be a truth or a lie?
Truth.
You understand the difference between a truth and a lie?
Uh-huh.
And you understand that here you're supposed to tell us the truth. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. Do you remember the last day that you spent over at John and Ms. Thomas's house?
Uh-huh.
Tell us about that day.
I was watching Tom and Jerry, and then John closed the door and locked it, and then he put his private parts in my
Put his private parts in.
bottom
Had he done that before?
a couple of times.
And where were you at that day?
In his room.
Okay, who shares a room with him?
His 2 brothers.
Okay, and you said he closed and locked the door?
Uh-huh.
Who else was in the house?
Me and Philip David.
Were they